people are joining, so we'll just give it a second. Started.
You look like you're in a different space today, Teddy.
I am. I'm on the West Coast, which, you know, I've become a rookie at traveling again, so getting the times right is not that easy.
No doubt.
I used to be all on top of it before. Now it's like, oh, what time is it now? And it's just all over the place.
Yeah. You have to go back in training.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so it's 1 minute past the hour. Good morning, everyone. Carol, are you on? I do see you're on.
I'm on.
Okay, should we start with a roll call?
Yes, that sounds good. Okay, Teddy Bickelli.
I am here.
Teddy, present. Yvonne Caribou. Nolan Coffin. Steve Fensky is unable to attend. Steve Georgie.
I'm here.
Georgie here. Jason Hollanday is unable to attend. Mark Johnson.
I'm here. Good morning.
Johnson here. Brian Crambier is unable to attend. Micah Myers.
Here.
Myers here. Phil Stahlberger.
I am present.
Stahlberger here. Teresa Sunday.
Here.
Sunday here. Jim Wycombe.
Here.
Wycombe here. Paul Wirtz.
Good morning.
Wirtz here. And Dave Wolf.
Good morning, everyone.
Wolf here. Thank you.
And Carol, I think Yvonne also joined if you.
I'm here.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Just having technical challenges this morning. I've overcome them.
I was there with you, Yvonne. I was having the same issues. So, okay, well, welcome to the November meeting. This is our second to last meeting before the end of the year. As far as agenda today, in a minute, we will approve the minutes from the previous meeting. And then we'll do a quick update from the Office of Broadband Development. So Bree's on and she'll give us a quick update there. And then the rest of the meeting really is dedicated to working on the draft report. One of the things we had talked about last year is to have a draft report available a little bit sooner so we could have a healthy discussion on the various recommendations and even the report itself. So Scott will have a draft up and then we'll break it up into two pieces, which are the two subgroups. So we'll do affordability and adoption first, and then we'll get to funding, mapping, and usage. Again, today the goal is to have a healthy discussion. We're not going to get into wordsmithing or kind of making it perfect, but really making sure that the content that we're putting together and the recommendations we're putting together are the ones we want. We've allotted plenty of time. Each section is given at 30 minutes, but if we need to take more, that's fine as well. We do have time in the room in the agenda if we need to do that. And then we'll just, once we're there, the idea is that the report will get further streamlined, further getting closer to a final. But we'll probably work on it, maybe a little bit adjustments throughout the month. And then when we get to our December meeting, hopefully the idea is we have almost a final report ready. And in that meeting, we'll be able to approve our recommendation for 2022. So looks like from a timeline perspective, we're in good shape there. If we do need to have additional meetings in December, we can do that. But hopefully I don't anticipate to have any of those meetings and take up more time on your calendar that's necessary. So that will be sort of the format for today. And then we'll just close off at the end with any additional business or any other closing remarks. We'll let others who are not on the task force be able to chime in if they need to or have something they want to communicate to this task force, and we'll adjourn for the day. Any additional topics before we get started that anybody wants to include today? Okay, seeing and hearing anything. So with that, let's do an approval of the minutes. So the minutes were posted in the calendar invite that was sent today. Hopefully you had a chance to quickly glance through them. Any corrections, additions, comments you'd have on the minutes from the previous meeting? Okay, I will take silence as approval for that. So meeting minutes from October meeting are approved. And with that, let's dive right into the Office of Broadband Development update. Bree?
Good morning, everyone. I just want to first say I am extremely humbled in all of the partners, including many of you who have reached out and have made well wishes to me as I transition into this new role. Not gonna lie, definitely drinking out of the fire hose right now, but also I'm really thankful for an incredible team that you all know is really giving me the strength right now, at least, to believe that I can do this. And so thank you to all of you, and just want to say I'm really enthusiastic about the opportunity to really look at the intersection of infrastructure and quality and skills in this next sort of venture in my leadership, but also the planning. So with that, just a couple updates. The line extension program is online and open for applications, so please share the word as best you can. As far as the BEAD and digital equity planning with NTIA, we are jumping right in it, working on getting the kickoff event going, and hopefully at the end of January. So sort of working on all those logistics. I think it was day 3, I was with Hannah at the NDIA conference, or it was training for the digital equity program in Louisville. And so got a lot of information, brought it back, and the team and I have been working on sort of figuring it out, the next steps, and really diving into all of that planning. So, and also just making sure that you all know that you're an intricate part of making sure we have the necessary information within the planning process to really make it a Minnesota plan. So, the FCC mapping will be released tomorrow, and that mapping will go through January 13th. We're trying to get the word out, but also encourage all of you to look at those maps and put in any challenges that you may have. And again, just spread the word on that. We want to have really good, thorough maps because that's what the BEAD funding is really going to be looking at, the eligibility pieces. And then we did provide an update on broadband this week at the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. And we're really excited to work with all of the tribes on that digital equity planning. I'm sure you're all waiting, but the border-to-border broadband grants hopefully will be announced early mid-December. We are just waiting on some of the pieces there, and I know we probably like it to be announced tomorrow, but we're working really hard on that. The next round for the 2022 award, or the next round, will be announced after that. And state law does require that we do a 30-day scoring criteria. But before that opens, we're also waiting on NTIA to approve our scoring criteria for the low density pilot program. So a few moving parts there, but and if we need more clarification on that, I'm sure Diane will be happy to jump in there, but that's kind of where we're at on the next round. And then finally, I just want to remind everyone, we do have 2 positions for grant administrators open. Applications are due on the 28th. And then we are hoping and working on some other job postings that will help support our planning processes as well. So those hopefully we can get done and moving quickly, because we're in the midst of really wanting to do some quality planning, and those sort of roles are really going to be important to help support us. So with that, unless there's any questions, that's what I have.
Thank you for that update, Bree. Questions for Bree from the group?
Bree, do you want to say anything about the American Connection Corps panel that we did yesterday on digital equity?
Sure, sure. Thank you. Yes, so had the privilege to be at Land O'Lakes yesterday, and Benya and her incredible group of fellows from across this nation were there, and Scott did serve on the panel as well as Carter, who is one of the fellows up in, I believe, Ottertail, Tom Karst with NTIA, and Hannah from our office as the digital equity lead, and then myself, and really such an incredible group, a lot of robust questions for us. And I think they would have asked us questions for a lot longer, but we were limited on time. But just the enthusiasm of all of those in the room to really work on broadband and provide their communities with opportunities that they're going to take back with them was really, really inspiring.
I think Georgie has a question.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could just clarify what was the total amount of the 2022 grant program and what's anticipated for 2023.
Yeah, I'm going to throw that over to Diane. I believe it was 100 million, was around where we ended up with, or just a little bit shy. But Diane, do you want to jump in and clarify?
Sure. The amount that we put out for the RFP was 95 million, 70 million from capital projects funding and 25 million from the fiscal year appropriation. Because we didn't have a grant round for a couple of years, we've had more projects close out than maybe normal in a year. And we've added that money back in plus interest earnings on the account. So the amount we're looking at awarding is between 99 million and 100 million in the next from the applications received by August 4th. And then for the next grant round, it will be the 25 million in state fiscal year 24 appropriations, the 30 million from capital projects funding for the low density pilot program, and then about 12 million more in capital projects funding. So for the traditional border to border, it should be about 37 million plus 30 million for low density. So we're looking at a round of about 67 million. And again, we won't have many projects close out in that shorter window. So I would anticipate it'll be real close to that 67 million. And assuming we have worthwhile projects to fund, which I'm sure we will.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I'll piggyback on that. Say for some reason you don't use 100 million, would it roll over, or how would that work? Just curious.
So 100 million, or go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, I mean, we could roll over. We had about 185 million in requests. So we are anticipating we will award that close to 100 million based on the applications that we have reviewed and scored.
Got it. Thank you.
And Diane, just to clarify, the 67 with the 30 plus the 37, that's with what's approved by state. That's not including any of the BEAD funding, right?
Yeah, Bree's shaking her head. No, we don't know what our BEAD allocation is, and to date, the only funding that has been approved is the money for the developing the plan. We don't expect to even know our allocation. I think it was June 30th is the target date for NTIA, and I'm not sure if that includes the full challenge process that they have. I think there's an opportunity, and this is a question for Tom Karst maybe. I think there's an opportunity for states once they know their allocation to maybe disagree, but yeah.
Okay. Steve, do you have a follow-up? Go ahead, Bree.
I was just going to say, and that's why the mapping, the accurate mapping is so critical.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna go to. Is the mapping that comes out is the BEAD funding is dependent on the mapping that comes out from the FCC. So, Steve, George, you had a follow up.
Yeah, I was just curious, Diane, is the grants that'll be awarded in December here, are they still restricted to the 2-year time frame for completion?
Steve, that is not in statute. We know people want broadband ASAP, so our office has requested the 2-year schedule, but we have a few projects right now that are under extension for various reasons. Some of it is supply chain related, but some of it is they weren't using up all of their funding, and so they wanted to keep the application open to pay for more of the drops as customers sign up. So the 2 years is not set in statute. That's our preference, to get those projects billed ASAP. But we do extend contracts for good cause.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Well, Bree, thank you for that update and official congratulations and welcome. We very much look forward to working with you. We're excited that you're in the role, and I know that everybody on the task force is going to probably be reaching out to you at one point or another. So glad to have you officially in this meeting, and look forward to working with you in the future. Okay. Moving right along, next piece is now we're going to go through our draft report. So Scott, I will turn it over to you so you can share your screen and we can start the conversation.
Thank you. This morning we'll just take a very quick look at the draft structure. It's essentially the same as last year, but I do want to invite and encourage comments for where we can continue to expand or improve upon the format that we created for last year. And one area in particular would be to elevate and highlight the digital equity planning work that is happening in OBD right now. So I'll share my screen and we'll do a quick walkthrough of those slides. Is everybody able to see that?
Yep.
Since I lose most of the faces here. So as you recall, for those who were here last year, we switched from a long text-oriented format to a slide PDF format, and so it's made it a lot easier for legislators in particular to digest. Be very easy for us to add components to this format, and at the same time keeping in mind that we want to have the length be under control. So we don't want to go necessarily from 38 slides to 65 slides. So if you have ideas, please put them out there and we'll take them under consideration. So next up, we have a simple table of contents. We cover the things that have to be included in the report based on statute. We indicate exactly what that is in the introduction, what is the task force, what's the order in which provides the requirement for this task force and the goals of the task force. We then have an executive summary. This has not been updated yet, so we'll incorporate current information in the executive summary. And then we do a recap of the statutory goals. You'll see some, for those who saw last year's report, you'll see some new photos, and thanks to all of the folks on the task force who offered up some additional new photos for the report. I appreciate that, and we'd be happy to take some more. There's plenty of spaces in the report for additional photos. So here on this, we go over the speed goals and the comparative goals that are built into the statute. We then show a historical estimate of the progress that's been made relative to those goals. So this graph will be updated to incorporate 2022 progress.
Scott, one comment on that slide.
Yeah.
As you walk through it, from last year, where the dots end up at the end, like we should actually label it to see what that number is, right? So if it's 92.3% or something, I did get some feedback on that.
Got it. Okay, let's see, where did I put my notes document? Thanks for that. Let's see, next one up. So then we review the statutory comparative goals, where we are relative to those comparative goals. I'll need to get some updated information from the Office of Broadband for where we stand on this, and I think we relied last year on some outsourced reports. So that ties back to that requirement to show comparative goals. From there, we move into talking about the key challenges, and the format that we arrived at last year was to number the individual challenges so we could align them more easily with the recommendations that come up later on in the report. So each one of the numbers here provides a reference to the subsequent recommendations. We are starting out by talking about the unserved and underserved areas, and we'll go from this quick overview into our challenges and recommendations document that has the details of what each of the subgroups have been working on. So they haven't been put into this document yet because we wanted to do a little workshopping first. Mapping and funding, uncertainties cause delays. We'll talk about affordability and adoption, and digital equity and digital literacy. So those are the main top-level areas. And then we flow into the recommendations section. Again, connecting missed one here. The numbers with the challenges that were reported earlier. Same thing with affordability and adoption. And then we show a summary of our past progress on recommendations, to the extent that any of those recommendations in previous years have actually been acted upon by the legislature, what action has been taken. And then we had a section to point to some of the economic impact of broadband. I'm sure there's some more current information that we can add in here. Last year we had quotes from Benya and from the Land O'Lakes CEO, and additional reporting from the Brookings Institute. There may be a new source for that this year. And then we brought out some of the updates from the Office of Broadband, highlighted some of the cooperation relative to that, and I think we'll bring in some of the experiences this year from the regional areas with township and county, and what they did with ARP funding, and expand that requirement or need to continue leveraging the cooperation amongst those organizations, the regional development commissions, the initiative foundations, and the Minnesota Technology Education Network. And then we have some stats. These have not been updated yet, but this is a key section of the report showing where we stand right now with availability at the various speed levels, how many households are still without and are unserved or underserved. And we made distinctions between metro area and greater Minnesota area. Appendix is for all the stuff that we don't want to have in the main body of the report. So we list the task force members, a couple of changes that have happened here. I had a question about, is Dale Cook still on the task force?
No, we'll need to replace Dale with, and put Phil's name in there.
Okay, great. That's kind of what I thought we would do. Fantastic. And then I indicated that Bernadine was resigned. There's some notes on technology, and this is something that was pulled from previous reports. I'm not sure if it's still as relevant, but we had definitions for each of these technologies that might be helpful to legislators, and we had quite a bit of conversation about a couple of the definitions relative to wireless and satellite last year. So if there are any updates to the sections that you would like to see, please let me know. We had a number of resources here for the maps that are present on the broadband website, but maybe not as easily accessible. So they're all listed here with links. And then all of the various resources that were referenced in the main body are hot linked here as well. And then finally, in the glossary of how we describe or define unserved, underserved, and high-speed internet. So that's a quick overview of the report structure. Comments, questions, suggestions?
Steve George has a question or comment.
Steve?
Go ahead, Steve.
I'm just wondering, because we're trying to provide recommendations to the legislature, and I think many of them were aware of the RDOF auction back in 2020 and 2019, 2020, and maybe a map showing the RDOF areas that were not approved in their long form, because that encompasses quite a bit of Minnesota. I know it's referenced in the report, but I'm just wondering if a map reflecting that would help emphasize, that there is a significant task ahead of us, and some of that was not our fault, but it might help illustrate those unserved or underserved areas even more.
Got it.
I don't know.
There's certainly room to do that, and a couple of places where we already have a map that we could replace that map with or add to an additional slide that is showing areas specifically highlighting where RDOF coverage went away. Other thoughts on that? Thank you, Steve. What else?
Any other questions, comments on this is the format that we're going to be following. Obviously, we'll make the updates on all the necessary sections, and of the challenge and the recommendations, those will be refreshed. And then on the numbers, obviously. But
yep.
Is there any, everybody like the format, or do we need to change something, or does this look okay?
And I'm particularly interested in anything you see missing. If there's a section like the digital equity planning piece, there's a lot of conversation happening around that. I think that bears elevation. There's going to be a lot of work done in that area. Mark has a question. Yep.
Yeah. Do I just clarification? I'm sure. I think I know the answer, but just so you can say it, Scott. I assume you're going to put this out, and we're going to have an opportunity to fill in some blanks.
Yes.
And send some information to you, right, to consider. Is that correct?
The intention is after our workshopping today with our list of recommendations and challenges, those will go all into the body of the report and get some updates from the Office of Broadband on some of the statistical numbers to make sure those are accurate, and then I'll circulate a draft of the full report. All right. I think we can shift over to the document then, Teddy, if that works for you.
Sounds good.
So it looks like we've had some folks already busy adding some things, which is great. The affordability and adoption section is in the last half of the document, so if we want to start there, Yvonne or Mark or anybody from that subgroup want to take us through the challenges and recommendations.
Yvonne, did you want me to kind of do that? I think that was the plan.
Okay,
Are
go ahead,
you?
Mike.
That's
Are
fine.
you,
That's
Scott?
fine.
Yeah, please add Yvonne and others from our group, because I don't know if I'll do it justice. Are you going to display that at all, Scott, or
I can, yes. Sorry about that.
that might be helpful for people?
Sure.
I mean, probably people have it up on their screens, but maybe for those that don't.
Yeah, let me get it over to another screen where I can make it bigger.
Sure. Yeah, we have quite a list of both challenges and potential ideas for recommendations, and we need help from folks to help us help guide us on what you're comfortable with, what ideas you have to add to it, and so on. But we started off in the adoption area and said identified many challenges. Obviously, in terms of adoption, one of the key challenges is there are people, right, who still don't have access. And that's going to be updated in the final with numbers from OBD and from the mapping and so on, at where we're still at with who doesn't have access to at least 25.3, and there are people and businesses and individuals who are in that situation. We identified that, interestingly, in terms of adoption, you can't adopt it if you don't have access to it. But then what are the things that prevent people from taking advantage when they do have access? And, we have programs like the Affordable Connectivity Program and so on to help people. And we kind of identified that idea of there's some community members who just don't trust government programs. Or have concerns about security or other things, so they just don't take advantage of available services. And so, what are things we can do, to help with that? And I'm not going to read all of this to everybody because you can read it too. But that was one thing we certainly identified, that there are people out there who won't take advantage of what they have available to them for various reasons, and some of those reasons are trust. Another reason is language barriers. So non-English speakers may not be getting the information that they need to be able to access what's available to them, right? Insufficient understanding or familiarity with hardware and software. And that's long been, a situation where you talk about speed tests and so on, and the fact that sometimes oftentimes it's not about the provider, it's about the equipment that people have themselves, and if they don't have an understanding of what it takes to get the higher speed access, that sometimes it takes an improvement in their own equipment. They don't understand that, or don't have a technical background to know when their internet is out. Is it their problem? Is it the provider's problem? Do they just not do anything and they just live without it for a time because they don't know? Just those kinds of barriers, right, to adoption. Sometimes they can be technical. Sometimes they can involve a customer or a resident or business's own equipment. Insufficient digital literacy, knowing how to find that information for themselves. Where do they go to look for available providers? They may not know. They may not have the skills to do that, even if they can have access at a public location like a public library or somewhere like that. They still have to have the digital literacy skills to know where to go, to know how to find that information, unless there's somebody who can help them with that. And that might come up later in our recommendations. And then kind of along with that, knowing about options for providers in their area. Now, OBD has the map, right? And I think in the document here we have the steps, right, that you take to go to the general map. But there's quite a few steps. And sometimes, when they get there were no results found, but yet there are options available. And so it's not 100%. Depending on how they put in their address, depending on how a number of things might lead them to inaccurate information. And while that map is full of information, again, you need those digital literacy skills to be able to use it. So that is sometimes a barrier. than for people to adopt, because they don't have the skills needed to find out what their options are and get that high-speed access. And then there's other populations. We talked about language barriers, things like that, but there's also people who need adaptive devices to access, right? And if they don't have the knowledge, the wherewithal, the ability to have those adaptive devices, whether it's screen readers, captioning, things like that, that may be, as we say, a temporary or permanent challenge. It depends. So folks with disabilities may have an issue there, and we noted some statistics, to go along with that to help. Again, these are all still challenges, right? Insufficient promotion of the many practical needs or uses for broadband. Again, some people just don't understand that with high-speed access, they may have access to a number of telehealth options with their own provider that they just don't know about. And so they don't understand the importance of the high-speed broadband if they don't understand why they might need that. Other state services, other services that are now becoming available more prominently in an online format. Again, people just don't always know about that. We identified, you've heard me talk about this before, a lack of leadership in some areas. And I, being the education representative, I point out the Minnesota Department of Education not having strong leadership in education technology or technology in general. And we can note a number of statistics about that. But schools have an opportunity, because they are so connected with our families, with our residents across the state. They have an opportunity to be one of those sources of information that takes care of some of these challenges and roadblocks in working with the families that they do. And libraries, again, and library services comes out of the Minnesota Department of Education. Public libraries, again, also have obviously a very large reach into their communities and stand to have the opportunity to be, again, those sources of information to help people get past these barriers. But right now there's not strong leadership in those areas to help coordinate those efforts and to work with the Office of Broadband and other agencies to do that. Smaller communities may not have capacity to follow up on opportunities that might exist with fellowships, anything with digital navigators that might be out there from organizations or agencies, grant applications, so on and so forth. Smaller communities don't have the capacity to do some of those kinds of things. And then we talked a lot about reliability and not having a lot of information about reliability, which is probably as important in broadband internet service as anything else. If it's not reliable service, that probably doesn't help, right? So those were a lot of our challenges in adoption, and I hope I haven't dragged that out too long. But does anybody have any comments on any of those that they want to put in now, or ask a question of our group, or does my group have anything else they want to throw in terms of challenges in adoption?
I think you covered it.
Okay. Probably too deeply covered it, maybe. I don't know.
A little wordy.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I'll cut it back a little bit. But these are the things we've talked about, right? And I think it's good for people to know these are all the areas. There are a lot of challenges still, right?
Definitely some editing that we need to do, but that last one is, I just want to emphasize, it's about a perception of unreliability. It might be that providers are, mostly providing reliable service, but there's definitely a perception, at least as evidenced in this one report, of unreliability. So that's one of the things I want to just mention. It's a perception of reliability problem, which may or may not be real.
Thank you, Yvonne. From a provider, thank you.
Hey, Mark. One thing I was thinking about when you had the education piece, right, on the making sure we have digital equity for students and all that type of stuff. I don't know if it makes sense or not, but I know we've talked about before how like Minnesota ranks last in computer science, like classes,
yes.
in classrooms, etc. And I wonder if there's something there around. Well, there's a way to accelerate that if broadband's available for everyone at home too.
Making a note. Thank you, Teddy, for remembering that. Okay, sorry, I'm just writing. Thank you. Be included. Okay. And I also I skipped the part about the Minnesota Department of Education does collect digital equity data, but because they don't have anybody there whose job it is to deal with it, they really don't do much with it. But that data can be very valuable in terms of identifying where the populations are that need to be more served in terms of adoption, in terms of access, and so on. So that's just another area for that. And then I'll move on to affordability, which is much quicker. What are key challenges in affordability? Well, you can afford it, right, or you can't. That's really the big issue. We have these programs, including ACP and so on, but information sometimes is just not readily available to the people who need to get that information, being the folks who can benefit from it, or being organizations who can reach out to those folks. So that's a barrier. And not all providers are assertively promoting their affordability programs. Some of them are doing a very good job, and we've had, Teresa has pointed out several things that their organizations and their providers are doing, which is great, but that doesn't go across all providers across the state, right? And I know that's an area that we can work on, and there's probably some things that can be done there. Not being able to afford a device, right? It's great if you have broadband access, but if you don't have a device to use it, that you're not going to be successful. And then we had the number 4 one in italics is something we've talked about. That's been even before I was on the broadband task force, this idea of equitably funding broadband in schools. Our schools all have great access, but smaller rural schools pay more for that access. And I've always tried to couch that, and in this case I'm talking about per pupil, which didn't resonate with our group as well as it maybe could have. But I think one way to look at it is school funding is a pie, right? And that pie is larger or smaller in terms of dollars based on the number of pupils that you have, right? But your pie is still your pie. And you have percentages, you have pieces of that pie that have to go to certain things, right? And if things are not equitable in public education, the way we think about it is, I have to take a bigger chunk of my pie to pay for this same thing, same service, same whatever, as a different school district has to, but they can use a much smaller piece of their pie, which leaves a lot more pie for all the other things that they do, right? And so if a small rural district has to pay very high costs for the broadband access that they need, they're using up a bigger chunk of their pie, and they have less of it for all the other things they have to pay for in education than a different school district does. And that may not have to do anything with the size of the district. It's just how much of that school funding money do they have to use? And there's a lot of inequity still in that. And so maybe that was a better way of explaining it. I'm not sure if that resonates with folks or not. But improving that, there's a program, the state has a program, Telecommunications Equity Aid, that has been static in terms of funding for a decade and a half, for 15 years at least. And there's been a lot of effort to try to increase that hasn't happened in the legislature. And that's been a recommendation from the task force for a number of years that just hasn't happened. And I'm just pointing out here that hasn't gone away. So,
So this 2019 data is still current, Mark?
I can do some updating of that, but it still exists. Yeah. The numbers maybe have changed a little bit, and I'd have to do some more data digging to do that, but I certainly can. So there, that was less wordy, right? Most of you know me. I can talk.
So you're still doing good on time. So just
yes, I know. I've been kind of watching that. So
good.
So on to, potential recommendations. And I think yesterday we had started to kind of whittle these down a little bit, but we left, it looks like, Scott, you left the whole kind of list that we had so people can think about all of these different things and how might they go together.
Yes, some of them can be combined, but I thought for this exercise it would be good to see them all.
Yep, exactly. So we had things, so, number one under adoption, and we kind of had this recommendation last year too, was to establish and fund a position or positions within the Minnesota Department of Education that provides leadership to schools and libraries, because again, library services comes out of the Department of Education, on education technology related issues, including adoption, digital equity, affordability, and more. So that's a pretty standalone recommendation that we're suggesting again. Another one from last year, we had recommended to fund more ACC fellows, and we had a number associated with that, and we're still talking about whether that number needs to be changed a little bit.
And I did have a conversation with Benya yesterday about that. She's going to provide me with some updated information.
Good. And that program, and the task force has heard about that program, but to do that, to fund work in rural communities and tribal nations to help bridge gaps, basically address all those adoption barriers, right? And that's been a successful program already, but it's been a relatively small program. And then we have a group of them that are kind of, we would say, I guess, and then the notes in the document say they've kind of fallen into the category of support for the Office of Broadband and for the Digital Equity Plan. And we weren't exactly sure how to make this a recommendation, or whether it needed to be a full recommendation or it was something else to think about. So the group, you all can help us with this. But we have several things like increasing support, or methods for people to easily find out what their options for access are, right? That's a barrier. They don't always know. How do we support that happening? Is it through digital navigator programs? Is it this fellow, these fellows obviously would help with that, but is that can we do more, right, than that? Providing easy ways for people to report lack of service or challenges with their service. This kind of falls into the line extension program a little bit, potentially.
Yes.
Increase, sorry, go ahead, Teresa. Was it you?
No, I was just agreeing. I think the line extension program is going to highlight a lot of people without or correct the maps. Yep. And looking forward to seeing more on that.
Yeah, and we have that under the additional considerations too, and maybe that becomes some kind of a recommendation from the group. Increased digital navigation supports. Again, how do we put this in? What we struggled with was, we got lots of ideas. We were struggling with, how do we put this into a recommendation that the legislature or the governor can act on? It's easy for us to say, well, we should do all these different things. Who does that fall to? Is that a legislative request, or is there some other way, that we find to accomplish some of these things? So we had a lot of things with other programs with digital navigation and digital literacy that are listed there. We talked about curating a library of instructional videos to help folks with some of those issues around devices with language barriers, so they're available in different languages. Just information, again, because so many of the barriers are lack of information getting to the right people. In other words, getting to the people who need the service. Marketing materials. Again, who does that fall on to do that? Well, part of that, I go back and say, well, if you have a lack of leadership in some of these areas that could help with this, then we need that leadership. Then they can help figure out how to do some of these things. Reliability standards, and you heard, and again, I'll turn this over to Yvonne or Teresa if you want to expand on these a little bit, but those were kind of our areas of potential recommendations under adoption. And I'll pause so you can.
Well, I'm the anonymous there. I did put my initials on the bottom, but I just trying to wrap my head around what this would look like, or if you're just creating a complaint central type thing
Right.
and providing us where we have customer service virtually, and there's a bunch of them outside my office. So, you know, and we do have engineering. We have a lot of this. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around what the reliability standards would actually look like. I mean, is that a staff person collecting stuff, or is it a portal, or ISPs have that now? So I'm just trying to figure it out.
Yvonne, do you want to comment on that? Because you talked about
Yeah.
that yesterday.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it from the point of view of having, doing, you know, of course, you know, this is both, I wear both the entrepreneurial hat and the academic hat, right? So the academic hat was saying, do we have a good study of these perceptions of reliability within the state of Minnesota? And making sure that we understand what people's concerns are in terms of reliability. And then also talking to providers to gather how are they assessing reliability. And then as a state kind of coming together and saying, here's what we think are the good, you know, standards for reliability, both from providers and from consumers. So there's some standardization of that. That's all that was about. It was more academic than you're thinking. You know, much more like, you know, are we all on the same page when we say reliable internet, you know, and making sure that we're all on the same page with what we're talking about as a way to be helpful to providers and being able to, you know, help with that user education too. You know, people say, look, you can go onto this website and you can see that this provider is a really reliable provider. You might have some issue at your house. Give them a call, you know, and get it and figure that out, you know.
Because certainly a lot of the issues are in the home. We find that a lot, and customer service troubleshoots. And yeah, I told you guys about when the pandemic hit, and I actually took my laptop home and complained to the engineering department, and actually had the director of engineering come to my house as he lived down the street, and he just like, turn on your Netflix, and it's like, it's your laptop. And he was right and I was wrong, and I'm in the industry, and I wasn't even thinking. It was like, my house sucks, but it doesn't. So
it's the old between chair and keyboard problem. Yeah.
yes.
We experience that too. So this is in no way meant to be a criticism of providers. It's to be helpful in terms of thinking about making sure we're all using the same terminology and having, you know, kind of uniform standards that we can all point to and say, look, this is a really reliable provider. So if you're seeing things online, or you're, you know, feeling like you're having a problem at your house, it's not necessarily that the provider's bad. You know, you could actually go online and see their reliability rating, you know.
Yeah, and we do have a lot of support chats and things that people can utilize. But again, if your internet's down, you're not accessing them. So we could probably wordsmith this a little more too at our next. We should probably have another subcommittee meeting before the December 19th.
Yeah.
Right.
And it may be that there's these perceptions of unreliability when really, if you know, have standardized things and you look at all the providers across the state, they're doing, you know, they're doing a bang up job in terms of reliability. Then it's a matter of how do you address the perception, which is still important, you know.
Yeah. So I would liken it to a very similar situation in the healthcare arena, where you have all of these smaller hospitals and clinics around the state who have different ways to handle infection. And a number of years ago now, probably 5 or 6 years ago, they started at a state level to figure out what are standard ways to reduce infection in clinics and hospitals. And they came up with a collection of great best practices across the state, and then they adopted them as best practices across the state. And so many, many, many more hospitals are utilizing those standard practices. And if there's something like that that is akin to broadband, that then could be shared, it's a continuous improvement thing for our whole industry, and we can promote it as one of the reasons why Minnesota is a great place to be, because we have this capability that people share around broadband. Mm-hmm. And thinking a little bit bigger, because people move here and move away from here for different reasons to Minnesota. And there's an economic impact part of this that should be addressed, I think, in the grander scheme of how do providers in Minnesota address reliability? How do they promote it, as a matter of fact, promote reliability?
Wouldn't it be cool to be known as the state where they have amazing internet, you know, super reliable? I want to go there. It might be cold, but you're going to have
Not only 100% coverage, but the best coverage in the entire
When you're stuck
state.
inside, you have great internet.
Anybody else on the task force have questions or suggestions for our recommendations in adoption, what they might say or how they might be grouped together? I'm just giving you an opportunity if you have any ideas or things you want us to hear before we refine these. All right, I will move on.
Take us home.
Pardon?
I said, take us home, Mark, on affordability.
Yes, we're gonna go. Yep. We're going to do it. So under affordability, couple of recommendations, and these were a little bit more fine-tuned, I guess. Other than the first couple we had in adoption. I think part of it is invest OBD resources and time preparing materials, et cetera. That's addressing directly some of those barriers we talked about with not having the information to distribute to people who want to have broadband, right? But I think and then we have provide grants to help expand programs that go to people's homes and help them get set up with internet devices. That sounds like digital navigation. So it may, end up talking about that. But I think the part with OBD and even some of these other things are more our recommendation is to continue to fund the Office of Broadband Development, and with digital equity being wrapped into it, make sure that they have enough funding to do all these things that they need to do to address the barriers and challenges that we've shown. In here, again, we have the funding the ACC fellows. That was also one of the things that was in the adoption category. It can really go, both places, because obviously what they're helping people with in some respects is understanding the affordability programs that are available to them. So it kind of fits in both. I'm going to ask somebody on my group, number 4, the fund positions to support schools and libraries to arrange, coordinate, implement systems, etc. This sounds a little bit like it's addressing that issue I had with inequity in funding, but I'm not sure. Scott, do you know?
Yeah, that was my attempt at trying to package it.
Gotcha. Okay. So I was correct. This is kind of addressing that situation. And interestingly, there is a library program along with I referred to the school program for telecommunications access. There's a library program that goes along with that too. So I can certainly take that if people want that to be part of our recommendations. I can wordsmith that one for sure.
Awesome.
And then, in terms of the reliability, we had a little discussion about that before. I think what our group kind of came around to was, the legislature does this all the time. They fund studies about various things, and maybe we need a study that works with providers, right, and consumers to come up with this idea of what does reliability look like. And as Teresa said, there's already ways that providers report their reliability, and maybe we can figure out through a study, we can figure out what exists and what parts of that are helpful to show how reliable things are, and in a more standard way. So that became sort of one of our ideas. And then under additional considerations, we had the idea of do we need to recommend that line extension program have additional funding or continue, because we had a lot of discussion about that last year. There were some people, and I will count myself in that area, that said, I think this is a really great idea, but maybe I was concerned that it would take funding away from those folks who still don't have access at all, right, in the border-to-border program and things like that, and thought that maybe it was a little ahead of its time. Well, it probably isn't now. I've come to look at, because as we've identified our barriers and challenges, we know that there are people out there who need to be able to, who have the fiber running past their front yard, but they don't have a connection to it. Or they can't afford to bring it that last, quarter of a mile down their long driveway, et cetera, et cetera. And so having this program is that way of really getting those last people who are falling through the cracks in one way or another. So.
Right, it complements the border to border. Hey, Jim
Yep.
Waker put something in the chat, regional library telecommunications
Yes.
aid. I don't know.
Yep.
Do you know what that is?
That's the companion program I was talking
Okay.
about for libraries. That schools have telecommunications equity access aid, libraries have regional library telecommunications aid. Same program, same concept, separate programs for the two different entities.
Gotcha.
Yep. So there, see, and it's 11:01, so I think I did okay, but
Yeah. Good work.
there's
Thanks.
plenty of, as Teddy has said, there's plenty of time. If you folks on the task force have other recommendations for us to think about as we refine these, please let us know.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for the subcommittee? Just giving it a minute, but I'm not seeing any hands go up, anybody coming off mute. So great work there. I think we're in really good shape, and now the next step would be to put this into the overall format and the PowerPoint that we saw earlier under the challenges and the recommendations. And as Scott said earlier, that'll be circulated obviously, so we can still continue to comment on it and make adjustments if we need to. So with that, let's take a break now. We'll do a 10-minute break. It's 11:02, so let's come back at 11:12, and then we'll pick back up with the second half of the discussion on funding, mapping, and usage. Thanks, everyone.